Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to do a random steno demo, number 1 of a city council meeting. I'll share the screen.
But what you see here are potential funding sources based on what cities with similar infrastructure needs and similar budget priorities, the types of funding sources that they're pursuing. An equipment lease purchase, or sometimes it can be structured as a green energy bond. Basically, how they're structured is that the equipment or a real estate asset could be used as the collateral, and then to fund the project upfront, so you can take care of all of the needs at today's construction prices and get those implemented over a 2-year period, and then over each year pay that back with savings. Different than other projects that you may have done in the past where there wasn't a performance guarantee for the repayment source. This is specifically structured, and your RFP was very specific that the city is looking to have a guaranteed savings agreement associated with it. So what that means is that the implementing contractor, Climate Tech, is responsible for providing you a not to exceed price. So however the project is finalized, the not to exceed price, if there's any change orders, we would be responsible for those change orders and to mitigate any type of price uncertainty risk for the city. And then we're also responsible for the savings. So we have to provide a guaranteed not to exceed price and guaranteed savings. And then those savings are measured annually and used as a repayment source for any type of financing mechanism that was pursued. Or in the event that if you use restricted city capital that was already budgeted, or a portion of Measure I, the savings could then pay back the city for those investments. I think it'd be good to stop here just to answer any questions on how that funding plan is structured or any elements of the scope of work. And then we can kind of dive in deeper into an example of how energy savings has worked for a pilot program that we did for the city back in 2010. We did a pilot program for the city. So I just wanted to pause there and see if there's any questions that you might have.
Not yet.
Okay. So back in 2010 is when a climate action initiative was first kind of conceptualized by the city. And the idea was at the time was to do a pilot program of the lowest hanging fruit at just select facilities, not a citywide program, and do it in such a way that the savings could be validated over a several year period to see how the approach works. So a pilot program where the proof could be in the pudding, and then have the savings validated by a third party. So we were fortunate to work with the city for this initial pilot program. It was back in 2010, and then a year after implementation, the savings were tracked and monitored, and you had a third party consultant validate the savings to see what the actual performance was. The intent at the time was to then pursue a more citywide type of effort to address the rest of your needs. But I think just for a number of reasons, a lot of turnover, changes in city priorities, and I don't need to go into all the changes that have happened over the last decade and a half. But the project could never really regain momentum until the last couple of years. I think with the current administration really wanting to make some major headway on this, and then rates have quadrupled since this time. It's more of a have to do rather than a nice to do in today's current climate. So this is showing you right here an excerpt from the report of your third party. And you see right there what circled is the percent of the guarantee. It shows 178% of what we had guaranteed for the measures at these 5 facilities. Generally we're going to be conservative with our savings estimates because we're guaranteeing it that if you don't realize the savings, that we write you a check for the difference. Generally, our average is that we see our guarantees at about 120%. Yours perform better than typical. There's not an intent to completely understate the savings. This just happened to perform a lot better. And I think it's because it was a lot of low-hanging fruit that helped you to operate a lot more efficiently than you were before. And basically, that's just kind of in a nutshell how a savings guarantee would work. In addition to measuring the savings, staying on as a long-term partner after the phase of work is implemented, we also stay on as a partner to help with community engagement and sharing your story, applying for grants and recognition and other elements related to various scope measures in your project to help you share the story with your community. These are examples of 2 cities that have now dedicated websites for their energy roadmap. Some cities call it an energy infrastructure modernization program or a energy modernization program. These are 2 programs that they have a dedicated website that's tracking and measuring the savings, showing what efforts the city has made in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other, feats of basically the projects that are implemented. And this is just an example.
Real quick, the reason why this is because a lot of the infrastructure that the city is doing is not necessarily seen by the community. So it's always important to share, online what is being done, and whether it's through PR, releases or on the website, but it's your story, even whether it's additional to this project, all the sewer infrastructure enhancements that you're doing, et cetera. Telling that story in a way that is right in your website for the community to see is really what we've come along with other cities to do, like up here.
And sharing the preliminary assessment with you. The next step in the process after you've deliberated and spoken more about this with staff would be to actually pursue seeking financing proposals to see what type of options are available for various funding mechanisms. Then from there, we could put together multiple options for you to consider. And some of the options might be, okay, what would the scenario look like if you finance half of the project and then use other city funds for half? Or what if you finance 75% and internal funds for 25, or the inverse of that? There's many different ways that you could go about it. So we would be looking for some direction on what you think is a responsible way to go about funding this in a way that's conservative. We want to have the savings structure to not only pay for the payment, but also provide a net positive impact for the general fund and enterprise fund. So once we get that direction from you, we can then work with your finance team to solicit financing proposals. Climate Tech is not a financier. We don't have an interest in the financing, but there are a number of private lending institutions that have a strong interest in funding public sector infrastructure projects because they get a tax incentive for giving you a reduced rate, basically. So it's considered low interest financing in the major banks of the world, B of A, US Bank, and then there's local banks as well that specialize in funding energy roadmap, would probably express interest. So those could be explored. At the same time, concurrently as we're seeking funding proposals, we would go back out with our engineering team to fine tune all the elements of the scope of work that we shared with tonight and that staff expressed was, their priorities to finalize the scope of work, be able to provide a not to exceed price, to be able to provide a guaranteed savings estimate on an annual basis. And at that point is when we would be able to give a lot more details on the price and savings at whatever granular level that you wanted to see it. After finalizing the scope of work and reviewing the funding proposals, generally a city would have another workshop to review the fine-tuned scope of work and funding plan before actually, proceeding with consideration for implementing the program. This gives you a, kind of best case scenario, how quickly we could move. This may not line up with, your required timeline. So really this can be structured at whatever timeline that is best suited for your needs. The idea was to, if you wanted to get this, done and approved before the end of the fiscal year, so you can start the new fiscal year with this, program in motion. It does give you a better chance of being able to, go after some of the current federal incentives that we believe are gonna stay in place for the next couple of years, but will not be renewed after that. Yeah, lots of detail here. But we'll open it up now for questions.
Do we have any public comments? Yeah, council?
Yeah,
Any questions?
thank you for the presentation. I have a question. How long before the city will see
The thing we start to see in construction, as measures go online, we call this the construction savings. So as soon as that lighting measures start to go online, you start to see the savings as they go on. Our true guarantee period, where we're actually guaranteeing your first year, would not take place until the construction is considered closed out and we can officially turn over, operations for that infrastructure to the city. But we would start tracking it immediately during construction, and we would structure the first payment if you decided to pursue a financing mechanism like a municipal lease purchase or something like that. You would want to structure it in such a way that the payment is not due until after the savings have been realized. So usually about 2 years.
And if I understood correctly, it was mentioned about having protection in case of a power shutoff or a loss of power.
Yes.
Correct. How is that through batteries? How does that work?
So it's through a microgrid system. Right now, currently, it's targeted to be at the EVCC building, City Hall, and Public Works. And so right when the power shut off, there's an automatic transfer switch that turns on the generator, and the generator will run the entire city load. Currently, right now, either the buildings don't have a generator or they're undersized for the entire load and cannot operate in a full capacity. And so having full capacity is huge and very important for cities these days in resilience.
With the generator.
That would be the generator.
Yeah.
Correct.
Running on.
Running on natural gas. Yep.
Thank you.
Good question.
This is my question.
Hey there, I do have some questions. Thank you for the presentation. On the slide that has some preliminary funding options, if we can go to that, please. So when you talk about the total project, how many years are we talking about? Is that
To get
number?
that set.
Right.
Yes,
What's the years for total project completion, and then what does that kind of amount to on an annual basis? Should we start in the next?
let's say if this were to get approved before the end of this fiscal year.
Follow your timeline.
Yeah, the construction timeline is gonna be 2 to 3 years, right? So the funding sources itself would be budgeted over 3 fiscal years.
Okay.
So it's getting approximately, you see about 25% in the first year, because there's a lot of final, permitting and engineering and, equipment procurement that needs to take place in that first year. But as we're mobilizing, you see about 50% of it get done in the second year, and then finishing for about another 6 months, the latter 25%. But you can budget for that over 3 years for the initial capital, any capital that we contributed. And then the financing mechanisms, if that was something that you chose to pursue, we see cities structure them as 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years. Some cities even, doing longer, for 30 years. You wouldn't want to go longer than 30 years for assets like the solar. You don't want to go longer than that, the useful life of the asset. But that would be paid over a time period that you utilize the fund time period, the term.
And so can you just share a little bit about your company?
Sure.
How long you've been doing this? How many cities
Absolutely.
you help? You give 2 examples of success stories, but how long have you been in
Yeah.
business? What is your success kind of portfolio? And as well as I'm really just some of the things that really struck me that I really appreciate is the community engagement education, because I think the city does, we're a full service city, so we do so much that our residents don't know that we do, and I just feel like it's such a great opportunity for us to proactively share what we're doing. So I'm assuming that that's also included as far as like, fixed costs,
Yes.
right? And guaranteed savings, but this is actually something you do during the entire life of the three fiscal years that we're.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so we have you kind of also do this
Yeah.
in parallel.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is a value-added service. It's not added to the construction cost. We have, a marketing budget that, we allocate towards helping our customers tell their stories. But just to get back to, who we are. So Climate Tech has been operating under the Climate Tech name, since 1974. And we have an office in Poway, 6 offices in California, a headquarters in Arizona. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Bosch, the global technology and engineering leader. Bosch is, a $100 billion multinational conglomerate. What's different about Bosch compared to many other, big corporations like that is that it's privately held. So it's not kind of subject to quarterly shareholders, pressures that a lot of other energy service companies may be, that are publicly traded. One of the big differences between Climate Tech and other energy service companies, I think, too, is just that we've been operating and is the same name and standing behind our agreements, since 1974, whereas a lot of companies in this space are often bought, sold, and restructured or, changing their name. So it's just a little bit about what makes us different. I think another thing that makes us different is how we go about measuring and verifying the savings. There's different approaches that an accredited energy service company can take when they're measuring savings. And we're accredited by the National Association of Energy Service Companies. That was one of the minimum requirements in your RFP. And also on the U.S. Department of Energy, we're also accredited by the U.S. DOE. One of the other things that we do a little bit differently is how we measure and verify the savings. It's traditional in this industry to give energy savings projections based on an engineering model that's stipulated they'll give you a book, and because their book and their engineering estimate said that that's what you were going to save, that's what you save because it's pre-agreed to. We do our energy savings guarantees based on what's called International Measurement and Verification Protocol Option C, which measures your savings before the project, after the project on a bill-to-bill comparison per meter. So what that's a fancy way of saying that it's savings you can actually see on your bill. And that's why you see something like this. We're measuring truly based on what you're spending before compared to after. And, we'll stand, we welcome even third-party validation. And I think that's why we continue to get multi-phase relationships. We did this phase 1 15 years ago. Because it went well, we got invited back, to do another phase of work. A lot of our projects that we do in the city space are because we're getting invited back because we delivered on our initial promises. We work with other, large cities of similar population, like the city of Ontario, city of Santa Clarita. We work with a number of other communities locally. For the Escondido Union High School District, we've done 4 phases of work, Valley Center, Palma, Ramona, Lakeside Union. So a lot of SDG&E projects, and we.
Okay, so that was a lot of random steno demo. I think you might have noticed if you look back in there, there are quite a lot of mistakes. Some places, sustaining mental concentration was a little difficult, and I got distracted with something, and then I just threw a ellipses in there to indicate that I dropped something so that in post-production, I could go back and use audio sync to insert back what was missing. Also, sometimes I'm seeing mistakes in real time, and I'm throwing an asterisk in there so that in post-production, I can go back in and just search all the asterisks to fix the errors. Also, if something is unclear, not sure what they said, throw an indistinct in there. If multiple people are talking all at once, I put in a several voices talking at once indicator. So those are some of the things that happen in a real-time job. And that's the end of today's random steno demo. All the raw notes and all the mistakes will just stay in there. I'm not going to correct anything. Some of it was also a little bit of nervousness at the beginning and making more mistakes than normal. Okay, so that's all for today. Bye.